I think it just takes a lot of time, but I've had to give myself a lot of grace. And knowing that like when you are in a relationship with an addict, whether it's a parent-child relationship, a sibling, an intimate partner, like I think everybody has to decide how that relationship's going to look for them. Right. And I think everybody experiences it from a different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, like that was how I handled it. And I think I've had to be like, that's okay.
Yeah. Welcome back again to another episode of the Confident Mompreneur podcast, where we talk to real women from around the globe about real life difficulties and triumphs in momhood, business, relationships, health, and more. I'm your host, Kyrie, ready to give you real actionable advice to help you become the best, most confident version of you in all areas of your life. Let's get into it. Hey guys, so we've got kind of a special episode today. I'm actually in person here with my friend Faryn. So hi. So Miss Faryn, for those who don't know you, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Faryn Babbitt. I grew up in Laramie. I graduated high school in Colorado, came back for college in 2006, graduated from UW in 2011. I spent 10 years doing victim services work in Laramie at a nonprofit. And in 2022, I left that field and I'm a major gift officer now with the University of Wyoming Foundation. And I guess I should talk about my kids. I have 2 kids, a little boy and a little girl, and a husband, and 3 dogs and a cat.
And you and your husband have been together for
18 years.
Forever?
Forever. Yeah, we met in 5th grade.
That is so crazy.
Yeah.
But I love that. And her kids are so cute.
Yeah, they're pretty cool. They're cool. They're 7 and 10. Little boy, little girl.
Mm-hmm.
Fun.
Your little girl just like has so much personality.
Yeah, she does. She's a wild woman. Yeah.
She'll be a wild one for you when she gets to be a teenager.
She's a crazy gal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we have been kind of in the same circles in Laramie between like our nonprofit work and things like that for a few years now.
Mm-hmm.
And have really become friends in the last few months.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful for her. But we were talking a little bit earlier before we started this, just about how hard it is working in trauma work in general.
Mm-hmm.
What made you want to step out of that and kind of into this new role? Still within kind of that nonprofit, but not as much in the trauma work.
Yeah. Yeah. So I did that for a long time. And I do think that there's an expiration date that comes with doing work like that. I don't know how effective people can be forever. Because it's really hard and it eats away at you. And I think what was hard for me wasn't so much the client work and the trauma work. That was what made it great, was was being able to help people and find solutions for people. And I was really inspired by so many of them, but a lot of it was feeling like the work wasn't valued, right? Like I felt like I was always having to fight for funding for the organization because there would always be budget cuts at the state and federal level that would impact salaries and would impact service provision. And the criminal justice system, everyone who works within that system, prosecutors, cops, advocates, everybody knows it's frustrating, and most people feel really burnt out all the time by the system. And I think I just started to feel like it was time for me to find something else while I still liked the work, right? Like, don't wait until you hate it and you're totally like ineffective to leave it. And so I knew that I wanted to stay with nonprofits. I love the university because I went to school here. And so transitioning to a role where I could fundraise for programs at UW that, obviously give people an education. Like me, I was a first gen college graduate. I felt like that was really important work too. And so that's when I made that, the opportunity came, and I took advantage of that. Yeah.
We were just talking before we hopped on too about how much the system is just like a mess and all of the things. And, also working in nonprofit work, I understand like how difficult it is, and just the funding never seems to be there for the things that we need. Which is why I think it's so important as individuals too, to do our parts and, donate to the causes that mean a lot to us. Or, stand up as victims and put our stories out there for people to understand why these organizations are important. One of the events that I'm doing is the Spark Tank. I'll be the survivor speaker there for Save Project.
Oh, cool.
So I'll do that in a few weeks, and I just,
great.
Me, I feel called to do that.
Totally. Yeah.
And it's super important.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
So since you've transitioned over, how do you like working at the university and like all of that? Because I feel like I loved working at the university, and it's funny, when you work for a university, the funding seems like it's much easier to get than working in the small nonprofit.
Yeah, no, I love UW. I love UW. I love the foundation. We have such a great culture here and such an amazing development team. And, it's really, really cool to work for a university that, is so supported by people all over the state, because it's the only university in the state, and people love UW, and UW gives back to so many, all the communities across the state. And, it's a really fun place to be. And it's a busy job, and it's different. Like, I'm traveling all the time. I'm gone a lot, and it's fast paced, but, I would say, like, I've never had a bad day at the foundation because of where I came from, right? Like, nothing is life or death here, like it used to be. And so that's been really good. It's been really good for my mental health to get away from that and to do something that is rewarding and that I feel like I'm making a difference, just in a different way, right? Like, that's been really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. And I'm so glad you talk about that mental health portion. Because like you said, for anybody that's working in that trauma work, that mental health is so hard. I mean, we see the suicide rates among things like cops and other things that are in that all of the time. And you made a post the other day that I was reading through, and it really touched me, just about some of your own personal trauma. And I'm sure that kind of fed into why you got into what you did, but also probably made it a lot harder at the same time too.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was an only child. I am an only child. I do have step siblings, but they came into my life when I was older. And I went through a lot of stuff as a little kid that, was really difficult, because I was by myself as a kid going through it. I had really supportive family, but that made it really hard. My mom was sick. She had an autoimmune liver disease when I was born that she found out about after I was born, had a liver transplant when I was 9. My dad was a severe alcoholic. And my parents were divorced, which actually was a good thing, because it was for the best. And yeah, I went through a lot of dysfunction and just like, not just feeling really out of control. Right. Like, and so I grew up with a sense of what's right, what's wrong, and felt fiercely protective of people. I'm very protective of people that I love. And I wanted to make a difference. And I went to UW and I started taking gender and women's studies courses. And I really fell in love with that. I fell in love with it. And I had a real feminist awakening as a student at UW, and was like, these are things I want to do something about. Right. So that's what kind of led me to the work that I did for so long. And yeah, I mean, I think all of us are really a product of, oftentimes a product of how we grew up, right? And like what we went through. Um, and my dad died from alcoholism 2 years ago. And so, going through that at 30, I was 34 when he passed away, which is too young to lose a parent, right? And um, parenting my kids through that was hard and is hard. Um, and so, yeah, I'm glad that like my mental health and I'm okay. Um, having like being in this new role in my life to have the space, right, to deal with that. Cause my dad died about like 7 months before I left my old job. And it was hard for me to really process everything that had happened, because I didn't have a lot of emotional room. Like my cup was always, it was full. I was drowning all the time. And so it's been a good year for me since leaving, year and a half, a little over a year, I guess, not quite, to sort of process a lot of that stuff.
Yeah. That's so hard. I can't imagine like growing up like that, even being like an oldest daughter. I feel like sometimes, you get that emotional burden of the family and you have to hold a lot of things in and just be that person that they want you to be and make everything easier. And I'm sure that was even more true with you being an only child and having both of your parents going through things where they couldn't really be there for you entirely. What was that like, and like how have you kind of navigated growing up and like realizing, oh, hey, I actually have emotions and things that I deal with too, and I need to take care of that and not always push it down and like shove it to the side for other people?
Yeah, like I did a lot. I mean, I think I don't think anyone worried about me as a kid because I was very,
usually
like I was like like worrying about your kids that are like super well adjusted and like seemingly normal. Like those kids are oftentimes the ones that have really bad anxiety and they just do a really good job like compensating and acting like everything's fine because they don't want to make things worse for anybody, right? Which I think is probably what happened to me. So to my parents' credit, I don't think, sometimes I look back and I'm like, why wasn't I in counseling? Like, and also I realized like it was the 90s, right? I was born in 87. I grew up in the 90s and early 2000s. I don't think that most kids weren't in counseling unless they had like severe behavioral problems, right? Now everybody's in counseling. It wasn't like that then.
Right.
And so when I got into college, I started getting anxiety and I had never really had that before. So I started seeing a counselor on my own in my early 20s. And I did that because I knew something had to change. And I wanted to I've always been very proactive. So I wanted to like get a handle on it. Right. And so I started really trying to like prioritize myself. And then when I had my son, I developed really severe postpartum depression. And I didn't recognize it at the time for what it was, but that's what it was. I thought I just was like, I mean, who wouldn't be stressed? I was a new mom. I was doing advocacy. I was on call. It was hard. It was a lot and for anybody. And then I got pregnant again. I had my daughter and then it just like exploded into this monster. And that's really when I started to try to
ignore it anymore.
Right. And like, I tried to like go to therapy and do, cognitive behavioral therapy and read all these books and meditate. And I had Harlow, my daughter, in 2016 when my dad entered hospice because of his alcoholism the first time. And I say the first time because he was actually discharged because he quit drinking when he entered hospice and he got better. And I was a director of SAFE at that time, brand new when I got that job and had her 2 days later.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So I was like, this is fine. This is normal. This is why I'm stressed, and finally, when she was like 2.5, I started having panic attacks all the time, like every day. And it got to a point where I couldn't get out of bed. And so I went to my doctor, and my doctor was like, oh my gosh, like, I think I scared her a lot. It was really dark. And that's when she put me on medication, and that saved my life. That saved my life. But I was resistant to it for so long because I was like, I don't need that. Like, I'm just stressed out. And I hate that so much because so much of my motherhood days of like a new mom are so clouded over with that darkness, right? Um, and so now I'm a huge advocate for, I mean, I'm not someone that's going to tell everybody to get on meds, but my gosh, like, if, like, don't fight it,
If you
right?
need them,
Yeah,
take
'cause it
'em.
can save your life, right? And it did me. I mean, I was going down a really dark place. And so I've always really tried to like prioritize my mental health because I know that I've seen what would happen if I didn't, right? And so I'm very big on self-care, fitness, I still take my meds, right? And I probably will never stop taking them because it was so scary when I wasn't on them. Um, and I developed so much compassion for my dad, especially going through that, because my dad and I have very similar problems. My dad suffered with anxiety and depression, and his method of coping was just different than mine. And thankfully, I didn't go down that path. I easily could have. I don't think I have an addictive personality like him. But it gave me a lot of compassion because I know how horrible it feels. And I know that, addicts are not healthy, happy people, right? That's not why they're using alcohol and drugs. And so that was, it gave me clarity and compassion, I think, which is, I mean, not a blessing, but also I think the compassion helped me to sort of process what was going on with him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that you use the word compassion because I think that's really healthy way of doing it versus, just feeling like you have to stuff all the emotions down, but to actually understand somebody at a deep enough level to feel compassionate for them, but also understand that the things that they put you through were not okay.
Right.
Either.
Right. Yeah. Because as a parent, I deserved more as a kid, right? Because now I'm a parent and I know how devoted I am to my children. And I deserved more, right? I never had, my dad, luckily, he never hurt me physically or emotionally. He never abused me. He was always loving, but he was never around, right? Like he couldn't be a doting, dependable father because of his alcoholism. And so he was gone out of my life a lot. My grandparents and I were incredibly close and still are because they stepped in and took care of things that he couldn't take care of. A lot of excuses, a lot of lying, a lot of, dropping the ball and not being a father, right? And up until he died, it was that way. And yeah, like you can have compassion and say, this is really hard, right? Like he has a really hard situation. He's got his own demons, his own trauma. I'm sure that that's really hard. And then I think also you can hold people accountable, right? Because like my compassion ended there because I knew that my dad could be sober because he had done it off and on. And so when he moved back to Wyoming after being gone, and he and I like were in the same town again as grownups, and I saw it for what it was. That's when the anger came back, and that's when I really had to find that compassion again, because he wasn't doing what he needed to do to be sober, right? Like you can't just sit in an apartment all day alone and stew in your shit, and your mental crises and be okay. Like you need to go to therapy, you need to go to AA, you need to surround yourself with people who are going to support your sobriety. You need to quit hanging out with your old friends who are going to drink with you or who are going to buy you alcohol or whatever.
Yeah.
I just wasn't doing that stuff. And so I was compassionate, but I was also like, come on, and I set a lot of boundaries because of it. And that's something I've really had to deal with since he died, is the guilt over the boundaries, right? Because I was compassionate, but I was also pretty cut off. I didn't want to be around it. I didn't want to deal with it.
When he moved back to Laramie and you were obviously an adult at that point, did you sit down and have a conversation with him about like how you were feeling? Did you like set those boundaries with him, or how did it come about?
Yeah, never. I never did. I never told him. And my therapist really encouraged me to talk to him. I think for me, it's funny because when it comes to your parents, like you're a grown up, but you're still very much a child.
Yeah.
And I just didn't feel safe having that conversation. And not because I thought he'd hurt me. Like I said, he never scared me, but I didn't want to hurt his feelings. I didn't want to be vulnerable. Like I just never felt like I could do it. And so my boundaries were pretty quiet, right? Like he'd call and I knew, okay, it's 8 p.m. He's calling. I'm not answering the phone because I know he's been drinking. You know, he didn't get to see my kids. I didn't go see him. You know, I didn't go see him, and I didn't tell him he couldn't see my kids. I just didn't go see him. And some of the time I think like maybe my boundaries, I don't know. I don't think he would have quit drinking even if I had said, this is what I need you to do. Because I think my dad knew. He was always very honest with me about the fact that he was an alcoholic. And so from the time I was little, I knew that if there was alcohol around my dad, that was bad. That was not good. My dad was not healthy when it came to alcohol. Even when I was a little kid, I knew that. So he wasn't like in denial about it, but he would still lie about it. Like one day I saw him leaving a liquor store drive-through at 9 a.m. and I was driving, probably taking my kids to school. And I told my grandma that I saw him leaving this liquor store at 9 a.m. And he called me and he said, oh, well, Grammy told me that you saw me leaving this liquor store at 9 a.m. And I just laughed and I figured that must have looked really bad, but I was there because I was getting quarters because I was doing laundry. This liquor store was right next to his apartment. I was doing laundry and I needed quarters. So I went over there to get quarters. And I'm like, that's bullshit. I don't believe that, you know, and it was that kind of stuff that just made me mad, you know? And I wrote him a letter one time, which was like really therapeutic. I never gave it to him. But I had intended to. And I wrote him a letter and I think that was really therapeutic for me just to like write it all down, how I was feeling.
How did you deal with like the shame and the guilt that came after he ended up passing away? Because I'm sure there was a lot there, especially when you're raising your own kids and, you know, like trying to reparent yourself while you're parenting children and going through this big loss and like feeling all of that heaviness.
Yeah. It was awful. It was really awful because my dad had, at the end, he was in hospice. And they were amazing. Hospice is amazing. They're so amazing when you talk about donating to causes that you're, you know, they're incredible. And they took care of him in his last like few days. And at that time, it was like, it was so surreal because my dad was very strong. My dad was a biker. My dad was very brave. I mean, outwardly brave. I think inside he was not at all, but seeing him in those last days was like this broken, old, frail man, right? Whose life had just been eaten up by alcoholism and addiction. And I was with him when he died. I was with him every day until he died. And I think I had a friend reach out to me when he was dying and she said, guilt is a bullshit emotion, you know, and she was at the time, I think I was a little like, oh my gosh,
taken aback.
Yeah, but it's true. It's true, right? Like there's nothing you can do about it, right? You can't go back and I can't go back and change it. And my therapist and I have talked a lot about like how in order for me to be compassionate and be kind, I needed to have those boundaries because if I had ignored my feelings and I had let him have these long late night conversations with me on the phone when he was drunk. And if I had my kids around his drinking and his behavior, I mean, I would have not been kind. I would have been pissed off and angry, and who knows how I would have treated him. Right. And I also believe that there is life after death, whether you want to call it heaven or just the universe. And I know my dad understood. I know my dad understood my boundaries because he knew that I knew what was happening with his drinking. And I know my dad thought that I was a really good mother. And that was part of how I mothered my kids, is I protected them. And so I'm
sure some part of him respected that decision.
So. And I think he would have probably done the same for me if he were in my situation. And I've had dreams of him since he has died. And those have been, I believe that's him coming back, to say hi or whatever. And he's looked really good in those dreams and healthy again. And I think it's just taken time, I think it just takes a lot of time, but I've had to give myself a lot of grace. And knowing that, like, when you are in a relationship with an addict, whether it's a parent-child relationship, a sibling, an intimate partner, like, I think everybody has to decide how that relationship's going to look for them. Right. And like my grandparents, my grandma specifically was very supportive of my dad, not of his drinking, but she was almost to the point where I felt like she enabled him. Looking back, I think she was just being a loving mother. And I don't know that I would have done anything differently if it were my son. And that was how she handled it. Right. And I had to have those strict boundaries with him. And my uncle, his brother, had to have really strict boundaries, because it's impossible to be in a healthy relationship with an addict because it's so chaotic all the time. And I think everybody experiences it from a different perspective. And so for me, like, that was how I handled it. And I think I've had to be like, that's okay. Like, that's all right.
Forgive yourself for doing that, and knowing that what you were doing was what you needed at that point in time.
And knowing that, like, it wouldn't have mattered. Like, I was not, my dad was not, nothing, he was so severe in his alcoholism that, like, nothing would have been enough for him to stop. Right. Like, he knew that his health was failing. He knew that he and I did not have a relationship. I mean, it affected his marriage with my mom. It affected everything. And, some addicts can clean up their act when they're faced with like a severe health crisis, or when they're, they realize they need to have a relationship with a grandchild or whatever. My dad was not going to stop. It had too strong of a hold. Right. So I think knowing that too, like, there's really nothing I could have done to make it any different.
Well, and when you talked about your dad, like, growing up, I loved seeing the pictures of, like, you and him by his bike and, that big, strong, like, kind of biker man mentality. Do you think that kind of being seen as that strong, like, man was part of the problem with him getting sober, because he felt like he couldn't ask for help in a lot of ways?
Probably. Yeah, I do. And I think that it's also I think it's also had a huge impact on him drinking, right? Because my dad was smaller. My dad wasn't a tall, big guy when he was young. And he partied a lot in high school. And I think people liked who he was when he was, he was popular. He partied a lot. He did a lot of, he smoked a lot of dope and drank a lot. And I think
he was the fun party guy.
Yeah. And I think it made him feel good to be liked. I mean, who doesn't want to be liked?
Right.
And I think that's kind of like, it numbed a lot of the, like, insecurities that he had as a kid. And then that just, like, my dad, I think, was always very much about his image, and who he wanted to portray himself to be.
Yeah.
And it wasn't honest, because he was not, I mean, there was a lot of things about him that were maybe honest, but at the core, like he was not this tough, calloused biker dude, right? Like he was very tender and kind and sensitive and, but I don't know that he didn't, I mean, I think vulnerability is something that men really struggle with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
You having a son now, like, how do you parent your kids? And what do you think is different about the way that you parent your kids because of the way that you grew up?
Yeah. My kids, I'm on it when it comes to their mental health. I don't mess around. They're both in counseling. They, especially my son is a lot like my dad. My son is a lot like me, which is great because there were a lot of, my dad was smart and he was charismatic and he loved everybody and everybody loved him. But like that comes with, there was also a lot of darkness there. Right. And so he started having some anxiety and just, I saw things that I was like, I don't like that. And so I, got him into therapy. My daughter, just I think being a kid is hard. And I don't hold my kids to expectations that I don't hold myself to. Right. And so if my kids are struggling, then I'm going to try to figure out why, because I know that sometimes you can't just figure that out on your own. And so I've had to reach out to experts who can help them with that, help me help them. Right. But I know that addiction is genetic, right? Like I know it is because mental illness is genetic.
Yeah.
And so I am trying really hard to make sure that my children know what the resources are that are available to them, that if they're struggling, it's okay to talk about it, especially my son. It's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to cry. It's okay to say how you feel, that it doesn't make you weaker, all those things, in hopes that, when he grows up, if he does struggle, that he'll do kind of what I did and sort of follow my example and, going to counseling, getting on medication, all of that stuff to try to get a handle on it instead of going down that route that my dad went down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. And, I think just like holding that space for your kids and allowing them to like feel those feelings. And it's kind of fun to get to see yourself in your kids and say, like, I see all of those parts of you and I love all of those parts of you.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's super important.
Yeah. Because your anxiety can be a good thing, right? Like it's made me very productive. It's made me responsible. It's made me, I care a lot about my job. I care a lot about not letting other people down and following through with commitments. So it's made my kids good at those things. But yeah, like when it gets to where it's not good, then figuring out how to manage that is important.
Yeah. And not getting stuck in that victim's role.
Right. Right. Yeah, totally.
So you met your husband, you said when you guys were in 5th grade.
Yes.
So you guys have seen a lot of each other like throughout the years and been through a lot of these like big hard things and changes. How has it affected your guys' relationship as you've kind of gone and grown together? It's
been surreal, right? Because we met in 5th grade. We actually met through my dad. My dad and his dad were friends. And then we reconnected senior year of high school and started dating when I started school at UW. He went to WyoTech. And we grew up together. We really did. We've been together half our lives now. And I mean, I would say statistically it should not have worked, right? Like we were really young. We were 22 when we got married.
Yeah.
We were really young. We did wait a little. I mean, we were 25 when our son was born, but still that's pretty young nowadays to have a baby. And I think my depression, my postpartum really threw us for a loop. I spent a lot of time blaming him for a lot of things. And realized, and he doesn't really accept this. He feels like he had as much a part to play in the struggles we had as I did. But I do think, like, I don't think it's a coincidence that within like 6 months of me getting on medication, our marriage was
way better,
right?
But way to go for him. Taking some
but he's like, no, like, he doesn't let me take the fall, but I'm like, I was unhinged, right? Like I was not well. So like it's okay to like admit that, but like he takes a lot of responsibility, but like we've had some tough stuff, right? Like having kids is hard, being young and married is hard, your 20s are hard. And, job transitions, life transitions, it's all been really hard. But I think luckily neither of us have given up at the same time, right? Like there have probably been days that he's been like, I can't deal with this anymore. And there's certainly, especially when I was like irrational and unmedicated, there were days that I was like, I'm done with him, right? Luckily, it never happened at the same time, I guess. And
one of you was always fighting.
One of us was always hanging on. And I guess that kept it on the straight and narrow. And now I think we do well. Now we're just in this place of like, we're 36 and raising 2 kids and trying to manage our time and our careers. And we're both busy. And sometimes it feels like, we don't spend a lot of time together. I think oftentimes parenthood feels like you're just like a team raising children together. And there's not a lot of like us time. But we somehow always come back to each other, which I think we both just really value and like each other.
Has that been hard since you didn't really have that kind of a relationship growing up as like a model?
Yeah, I think, maybe. I mean, I do think so. I mean, my dad never had healthy relationships. My dad and mom got divorced when I was 4. My dad remarried twice. And they were both terrible relationships, obviously, right? Like, no,
like you said, when you're an addict, relationships and like don't work.
Healthy people oftentimes are not going to want to marry someone who's like a train wreck, like my dad was, right? Like he attracted women who were just as toxic, right? And so that wasn't good. My mom, I was fortunate that she remarried she married a man when I was about 7, who was really my dad. And he passed away when I was 13 from a heart attack. But when my mom and I when we moved to Colorado, to be closer to her family. And then she met my stepdad, my kid's Papa Dave, when I was 16, and they got married. And he is my dad. Like he is that dependable dad for me. And that's who my step siblings belong to, is him. And he and my mom, it was a blessing. They moved to Laramie, actually, to be closer to me and my kids. Right before my dad, they moved here in November and my dad died in March. So my mom's been here, through that. And that's been really good.
Awesome. And I was able to be with you.
Yeah. And I had really solid relationships with my grandparents, which was awesome. And I think I always wanted to have a marriage like that. Like both of my grandparents had. My dad's parents are amazing. They live in Laramie. And my grandpa is actually like best friends with my husband. They're very close. They're a lot alike. I think God sort of guided me to a man like him, right? And because they're very similar. So I had some good role models, right? And I've got really good friends too, who, I can talk to, but they keep me kind of, your close friends are going to check you, and they're going to say, well, maybe this wasn't the best way, or maybe this wasn't the right thing, or whatever.
Good friends aren't enablers.
No, right. Good friends
as much as we would like them to be sometimes.
Yeah, good friends will tell you, right? And I think that's important to have too.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's been so good getting to become like good friends with you and all of that. So I love that. And I think having good women in your circle is so important, especially when you're in the middle of like going through really hard crap and you're raising babies and you're working and doing all of the things.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Like it's so good to just have, your girlfriends are, I told my daughter yesterday, she had a fight with her girlfriend at school and they figured it out. But I said, Carlo, your girlfriends are so important, right? They're going to be so much more important than any guy, like than any guy, like boyfriend. Like you protect those relationships and talk it out and come back together and find that love with each other, because it's just, that's going to get you through is your girlfriends. And it's so true. Yeah. Forever still. Forever. Like you need that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So as we're kind of wrapping up things here, what tips, tricks, tools, anything like that would you give to a woman who's kind of going through a really hard thing, you know, is going through things with an addict that's really hard, and they're having to set boundaries and having to deal with, you know, that regret or shame, and they're also trying to do all the other things all at the same time?
Yeah. I mean, my advice is take care of you, really. Because you have to really just let people do what they're going to do. Right. Like that really, the let them theory. Have you heard of that? It's really changed my whole perspective on life. And essentially it's just let people do what they're going to do. If somebody wants to, you know, walk out on you, like let them. If your father is going to choose to be an alcoholic, actively using alcohol to cope or drug, let him. You know, because really, I think once you realize that you have very little control over other people's behavior, that doesn't mean you have to allow and tolerate bad behavior. Like you still get to set boundaries.
Yeah.
But I think knowing that like you're not going to change somebody, right? Like you're not. You can be supportive, and you should be to the extent that it's okay for your mental health. And you can be loving and you can be kind and compassionate, but like ultimately, you know, you have to let people do what they're going to do and just know that you have very little control over any of that.
I feel like it's so hard when you're in those situations not to take the blame on yourself for a lot of it. And I think especially as women, we're really bad about that. Like, you know, if I was good enough, then he wouldn't be doing these things. Yeah. But really, it has nothing to do with us.
No. And I think that was my biggest, I mean, that was one of the biggest things I learned as a domestic violence professional, right? It's like, girl, you are not like responsible for his bad behavior, period. Like end of discussion. You just are not, it doesn't matter. Like you are not, everybody, we all have free will. We all can choose how we're going to react to situations. And somebody reacting toxically and violently and all that, that is not on you, right? Like that is not your fault. And yeah, like we oftentimes are, women oftentimes can be really codependent and can be, you know, I am, right? Yeah. Especially as a kid of an alcoholic parent, and very much, and I have to work on that all the time.
Yeah.
Like I'm actively like working on codependency as we speak. You know, it's never gonna like go away.
Yeah.
But like recognizing that like you're not responsible for people's bad behavior. You're really not, and you don't have to tolerate it.
But we can still be compassionate.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Because that's for you. Like the compassion is there for you too. Kind of like forgiveness is there for you.
Yep.
Right. It's not to give someone else a pass or like make them feel better. Compassion doesn't mean that, you know, like it's okay. It's just, I understand that like this person has a lot going on and they've got a lot of their own trauma and I can't do anything about that. And I'm really sorry that that's happening to them. And at the same time, I'm going to set boundaries for myself because that's also not my burden to bear. Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So good.
Yeah.
I think that's a great way to wrap things up. I think we talked about a lot of really good, really heavy hitting stuff, but in a really good way that I think is going to be beneficial to the other people out there. Cause you know, there are so many people that are dealing with addiction and other, you know, really tough things. And so I think this was a really great conversation to have.
Yeah.
Thank you for being so vulnerable. Totally. I know it's hard. We were talking about that earlier about how hard it is to speak on these things, but thank you for doing absolutely. It. Thank you for being my friend.
Thanks for being my friend.
And where can people find you? where do you want people to reach out if they have any follow-up or anything?
Well, I have Facebook, Faryn Babbitt. Instagram. I'm not cool like Kyrie. I don't have like a social media. I'm not an influencer or like a social media person, but I'm always here, right? I live in Laramie. I'm always here. And I felt so alone with my stuff with postpartum depression and with my dad and just parenting, and didn't know where to turn. And so I guess if anybody ever wants to talk or needs an outlet, I'm here. Like, I always want to be here for people because it's important that we take care of each other. And I'm really open. I'm an open book about my mental health and about my experiences, because I just feel called to, kind of like you do, right? I just feel called to like be honest and vulnerable, because if maybe it could help somebody.
Yep.
So
makes us not feel so alone.
Yeah,
when we're
totally.
going through those hard things.
Totally.
So
yeah.
Well, awesome. Thank you for being here. Thank you guys for being here, and we will see you next week.
Bye.
Hey guys, thanks for coming to this week's episode of The Confident Mompreneur. If you loved today's episode, let us know, share to your stories and tag us, send to your friends, give us a rating, all of the things, and make sure to check out our guests and follow them on all of the links that we listed above. If you're looking for me, you can always find me at The Confident Mompreneur, and you can also check it out, www.theconfidentpost.com, for a blog relating to today's episode. I am so happy you're here, and I hope to see you again next week.